is not that you've never heard of him, it's that you've never heard the whole story. In our collective memories, the integration of the NFL is often remembered as something that happened gradually, almost naturally as the sport and the world evolved. Part of a broader social shift, inevitable, steady, and eventually complete. In that version of the story, there isn't a single moment to point to, no clear turning point where everything changed. It feels less like a decision and more like a slow correction over time. But history rarely works that way. Change is driven by pressure, circumstance, choices. And in the case of the NFL, integration wasn't simply the result of time passing. It came down to specific decisions made in specific environments, often for reasons that had nothing to do with ball. What we tend to remember is the outcome, a league that became integrated. The messy and uncomfortable details, the true stories of the people who forced that moment of change often go unspoken. Kenny Washington is one of those people. He was the first. In the mid-1930s, Kenny Washington wasn't just a star, he was one of the most dominant athletes in the country. He was raised in Los Angeles, where he was a two-sport star at Abraham Lincoln High School, leading both his baseball and football teams to city championships. During that time, he acquired the name Kingfish, taken from a character of the popular black radio show Amos and Andy. Washington was affectionately known as Kingfish because athletically that's who he was, the king of every field upon which he stepped. After high school, he played baseball and football at UCLA as well. By some accounts, he was a better baseball player than his UCLA teammate, Jackie Robinson. Washington was reportedly offered a contract to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers on the condition that he played in Puerto Rico first. Washington declined, but his athletic skill was undeniable. For the UCLA Bruins, Washington played tailback in their single-wing offense. The tailback in the single wing functioned as the quarterback, most often taking the direct snap with the option to run, pitch, or pass. He was the decision-maker, the offensive leader. Washington was All-American in 1939 and led the nation in a very meaningful stat in this era, total offense. It's a stat we don't talk about today, but total offense is the total of a player's passing and rushing yards. No player had more of it in 1939 than Kenny Washington. The 1939 Bruins finished undefeated with 6 wins, no losses, and 4 ties, finishing 7th in the nation in the AP poll that year. One of those ties was to the number 3 USC Trojans, a scoreless tie in the Bruins' final game of the year. Kenny Washington was the leader of one of the best college teams in the country, at a time when college football was more well known than the professional game, and then his football career ended, or so it seemed. Washington's career seemed over in 1940, at least at the highest level of the game, because the NFL, the highest level of professional football, didn't sign black players. 9 USC players from their 1939 showdown with UCLA were selected in the 1940 draft. 4 of them never played in the league. 2 of Washington's UCLA teammates were selected in the following year's draft. The NFL was clearly paying attention to the 1939 Bruins, but they ignored the best player on their team. The NFL had not had a black player since the 1933 season. The league did have black players starting with its founding in 1920, but only a few at a time and almost exclusively on teams based in small cities. When the NFL cut its number of teams from 22 to 12 in 1927, it also cut most of the teams willing to sign black players. From 1927 to 1933, there were never more than 2 black players in the league at a time, and beginning with the 1934 season, there were none at all. The league didn't announce its ban on black players. It happened in plain sight, without explanation or even acknowledgement. As fans, we can identify with the struggle an NFL player faces when he can no longer play the game. They often struggle to find their place in the world, retired at 35, or 30, or 25, with the rest of their lives ahead of them, no longer able to play the game that they played all their lives, not knowing what they'll do next. As fans, we can understand that pain. But what about the pain of being a player like Kenny Washington? Knowing without a shadow of a doubt that you were good enough to play in the league, watching less talented players get their shot and become stars while that opportunity is denied to you. Watching NFL teams draft players that didn't even intend to play in the league. Feeling your athletic peak wither away. That's a special kind of pain. Kenny Washington continued to play football, 4 seasons for the Pacific Coast Professional Football League, a respected minor league, but still a minor league. During this time, Washington starred primarily for that league's Hollywood Bears, but also suffered multiple knee injuries, robbing him of some of his athleticism. In 1945, Washington couldn't have had any idea what was coming next, that a former Negro Leagues baseball player would change his life. The Cleveland Rams were the 1945 NFL champions, but since joining the NFL in 1937, they had mostly struggled on the field and at the gate. The 1945 season was the first winning season in the team's history, and they had been losing money for years due to low attendance and low interest. In 1946, the Rams were facing a new problem. A rival league to the NFL, the All-America Football Conference, was about to launch a new team in Cleveland called the Browns. The Browns were co-founded by Paul Brown, who was already an Ohio legend. He won multiple Ohio State championships as the head coach of Massillon High and a national championship with Ohio State. If the Rams had it bad before 1946, they'd have no hope in Cleveland against the Browns. The Rams owner, Dan Reeves, threatened to pull his team out of the NFL entirely if he wasn't allowed to relocate, so the NFL agreed to let the Rams move to Los Angeles. Reeves was prophetic. The city that had no interest in the Cleveland Rams fully embraced the Cleveland Browns, as the Browns set professional football attendance record in their first season. In 1946, the Rams were slated to play in the Los Angeles Coliseum. The Coliseum was a 100,000-seat stadium that opened in 1923, the annual home of the USC Trojans and the host of the 1932 Summer Olympics. It was a fitting home for any NFL team, but were the Rams fit for the Coliseum? Many Angelenos weren't happy with the idea of having a segregated professional team in their city. Perhaps the unhappiest of all was Hallie Harding. Harding was an exceptional athlete in his day, a star college football player in the early 1920s. After college, Harding played for the black-owned professional basketball team, the Harlem Wrens. Later, he was a switch-hitting shortstop and outfielder in 7 seasons in the Negro Leagues. After retiring as a professional athlete, he became a sports writer and an activist, especially around the cause of desegregation in sports. In January 1946, a group of black newspaper sports writers met with the Los Angeles Coliseum Commission and Rams executives with a simple message. A segregated team should not be allowed to lease a stadium paid for by the people's taxes, including black people's taxes. Reportedly, Harding made the argument that persuaded the commission to make integration the condition of the Rams' lease with the Coliseum. The former Negro Leagues baseball player, who was denied the opportunity to play in Major League Baseball, was a major reason why the National Football League was reintegrated. In March of that year, the Rams signed 28-year-old Kenny Washington to be its first black player, and the first black player in the NFL since 1933. Later, the Rams signed 32-year-old Woody Strode, a UCLA teammate of Washington's. Washington and Strode opened the 1946 season as the only black players in the league. The Rams had integrated, but it would be understandable if you thought the NFL wasn't fully committed to the integration project. In a way, I get why the Rams chose Washington. He was raised in Los Angeles, played his college ball there, and even played in Hollywood professionally. He was a hero in Los Angeles. But one can't help but think that the Rams thought integration was a fad that might pass. They signed 2 players who had more yesterdays than tomorrows in football years. Washington had had 5 knee surgeries performed by 1940s doctors, and Strode was a 32-year-old wide receiver. From a distance, these seemed more like box-checking moves than franchise-building moves. The team that replaced the Rams in Cleveland, the Browns, also fielded an integrated team in 1946, but with a very different approach. Browns coach and general manager Paul Brown had coached integrated teams before, at Ohio State, and as the head coach of the Great Lakes Naval Training Station team during World War II. So understandably, he reached out to players he had already coached when building the Browns. Those players included black players, 25-year-old star defensive tackle Bill Willis from Ohio State, and 26-year-old fullback Marion Motley from the Navy. Unlike the Rams, the Browns' black players were franchise cornerstones entering their athletic prime. In success, they would be with the team for the long term, players you could build title teams around. Willis and Motley both played for the Browns for the next 8 seasons. Both are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It wasn't just the Rams who seemed not all the way committed to integration. The rest of the NFL was definitely in wait-and-see mode, too. Only 2 of the other 9 NFL teams in 1946 integrated before 1950. The Giants in 1948 with future Hall of Famer Emlyn Tunnell, and the Lions in 1949 with Wally Triplett, the first black player to be drafted, 3 drafts after Kenny Washington's signing. The 1947 and 1948 drafts passed without any black players being selected. Wait and see. By far the worst offender was the Washington Redskins. Washington and its famously racist owner George Preston Marshall didn't integrate until 1962, when President Kennedy threatened to evict them from their stadium, the second NFL team whose integration was forced by threat of eviction. Washington's first black player was Bobby Mitchell, acquired in a trade from the Cleveland Browns. In the beginning, it seemed like the NFL had hoped integration wouldn't work, but no one told Kenny Washington. Too often, the courage it takes to be first is unspoken, and it took courage to be Kenny Washington. The NFL didn't choose to integrate. It chose to protect its money, which in that moment required integration. This was the environment into which Kenny Washington stepped. Not unlike Major League Baseball Jackie Robinson, ironically Washington's UCLA football teammate. Of course, Jackie Robinson's story is well known. When he joined the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947, he carried the hopes and dreams of the entire black community on his shoulders, a community that was convinced if he weren't successful as the first, there wouldn't be a second. Even in the most sanitized version of the story, Jackie endured insults, on-field violence, and even death threats. He was targeted and beamed by pitchers and intentionally spiked by base runners. For the cause, Jackie had to pretend that none of it bothered him. Now imagine doing all of that, but in a sport where violence is legal and encouraged. That's what Kenny Washington was asked to do. He played a sport where there was a valid reason to hit him on every play, sometimes pile on top of him, 6, 7, 8 bodies at a time. It was an acceptable way to voice one's displeasure with his presence in the game. Washington's responsibility to the community and the players who would come after him was just as high as Robinson's would be 1 year later, but the physical threat was times 10. Despite his age, despite his injuries, Kenny Washington thrived in the NFL. He didn't pile up huge counting stats, but he was still excellent. He was still the kingfish, averaging 6.1 yards per carry in his 3 seasons in the league. The only back that had a higher average over that time? Marion Motley. Kenny Washington did something even more important. He made sure there was a second. Woody Strode only played 1 year for the Rams, making Washington the only black player in the league in 1947. That season, he led the Rams in rushing and the league in yards per carry, paving the way for a second. In the following year, 1948, the Giants became the second NFL team to reintegrate, signing Tennell. After Washington's retirement in 1948, he was replaced in the Rams' backfield in 1949 by Tank Younger, who was joined by Dan Towler in 1950. Younger was a two-time All-Pro in his 9 seasons with the Rams, and Towler was named All-Pro 3 times in his 6 seasons. Kenny Washington's courage and his greatness held the door open for those who would come after. Too often it goes unspoken what Kenny Washington's career meant and what it still means. In the 80 years since Washington reintegrated the NFL, the presence of black players has gone from being grudgingly allowed to common, to widespread but only in certain positions, to a strategic imperative, to a given. In the rear view, we take it for granted that it would always have been this way. It's easy to assume that all of these changes would have happened eventually, naturally, no matter what. Maybe, no one can say, but we can say this. This change, this progress didn't happen on a natural timeline. It was made to happen. Kenny Washington seized his opportunity despite having no reason to believe that it would ever come. He rose to the challenge in the face of physical and psychological threat, and in his greatness he exposed the lie of segregation. He made it obvious that a team without black players was a team that loved racism more than it loved winning, a team that was actively trying to lose. That's what Kenny Washington means. He made having a segregated NFL team untenable.